academic areas makes sense because that's what they could do with the computational thinking and different concepts that are included in different subject area. But nationally, it sounds like there is a huge demand for a central hub for teaching resources, specifically resources that are integrating CS curriculum into other subject areas. We have tons of resources, but they're all scattered. So it seems like a hub would be a good approach to one place that you could find all this stuff. And then there is a need for, as you saw, many of our students do not have access to computers. So there is a need for unplugged curriculum and curriculum to engage particularly young girls and women with disabilities. So we just need to have a little more resources for those groups that are perhaps in more areas that they do not have access. So basically looking at the main issues, diversity gaps still exist, insufficient access to computer science. We're making progress, but it still exists. As you saw, more than half do not have. And then clarity about the computer science curricula, inadequate teacher preparation, certification, endorsement. You see we have lots of issues with that. And then challenges on part of the higher education with regard to offering CS programs for teachers. And I think Diane mentioned that in her review, that the schools struggle to really fill the vacancies for the computer science, and many of them just live with one person, and training hundreds of teachers and thousands of them to teach CS, as was mentioned, is a challenge. And with the College of Educations that I'm more familiar with, I think lack of interest in computer science due to the cultural biases, and maybe in some research study shows that traditional approaches to teaching CS may have been a cause for that, and lack of resources, inclusive examples for underrepresented groups might be another issue. So what would be the strategies and how CSTA addresses those? So if you tease out those strategies, it would be recruiting, training, and retaining teachers. So that's basically a need in the area, improving the process of computer science for teacher certification. I think that's another area that CSTA is looking at, increasing the number of pathways to become a CS, and developing teacher preparation programs that offer CS as primary licensure. Because right now, majority of the programs are requiring licensure in their content area with some kind of incorporation of computer science, but not a primary licensure area. And obviously developing mentorship, coaching strategies for helping to increase our CS teachers, and offering, I think we're doing a great job in this state for that, nationally validated strategies and best practices to increase the diversity and meet the needs of students, and then professional development, and obviously including counselors, administrators, principals, school boards, and the CS PDs. So if you look at all of this, then you can see that CSTA resources help us achieving some of these goals with the resources that they have developed. So they really address every one of those issues that you saw. So this is really the categories of the resources, and then you can see how each one of them really addressing those need areas. That one category is a K12 teachers resources that provides guidance for teachers where they are, what are their strengths, weaknesses, what kind of professional development they want to have, and I'll go through the resources with you. K-12 administrators, resources for administrators to be able to see how CS education is conducted in their states, in their counties, in their schools, and then the resources for policymakers, resources for PD providers, and schools of education that I was part of for schools of education who would like to prepare courses, programs for CS, preparing CS teachers, and some other resources with regard to inclusive teaching resources and K-12 glossary that is very helpful. I have put the link to the CSTA site in the chat, I think. So you should be able to see that or just click on it and get to it. I think I put that right at the top. If you scroll up, you can see that so that you can see the exact link and follow through with that. So I know we have only 2 individuals here who may have some ideas. Christina, do you have any plan for K-12 CS Teacher Education Program? Is that anything that you're trying to achieve?
Not teacher education programs, but I came to this because I am interested in working in professional development programs with current teachers. So I feel like there's a lot of overlap in terms of how to engage teachers to see computer science as something that they can implement in their classrooms or take the lead on in teaching. So.
Okay, wonderful. I don't know if Lorianne is able, because I don't see the audio on her name. So can you talk, or are you hearing us? Okay, that should be fine. So for the CS K-12 and K-8, if you look at the approaches that people are using, there are different alternative or scenarios. I think you must be familiar with most of them. Basically, certification programs. And as I said, states have started to create certification program for teachers. Some of them have endorsement programs. But as I indicated, majority of the states who are working on the teacher certification, they require licensure area for the teachers, and then it's kind of an add-on endorsement. And for the certification is a credit hour between 21 to 24 credit hours that are required for teachers to get the certification in CS. But then if there's endorsement, I think it's about 12 to 15 credit hours of endorsement.
Or as low as 9. Do we have any idea like how many different institutions are doing these different approaches here? Was there?
Yes, there are very few states that are having endorsement. I do have the names of it, but I need to look that up. But we looked that up, how many of them, not very many, but majority of them do not have certificate. They have either specialty areas like Indiana, Georgia, and then most of the universities that are offering it as an endorsement. With, as you said, 12 to 15 credit hours, majority of them, but it could be even less, as you said. But they also have, a lot of universities are using third-party PD curricula for K-12. So that code.org, CSTA, Google, CS First, Microsoft Learn, Carnegie Mellon universities. All kinds of the resources, curricula that are available. So a lot of universities or states are using them as a way of preparing teachers or providing appropriate training for them. And then recently, as Diane mentioned, micro-credentials and MOOCs have been gaining attention. And some of the states or places that are using them are also naming it competency-based credential. And that's an approach that basically teachers are going through a series of mini lessons or modules or courses, and then they get badges for each one of them. The approach has not been very popular yet, but states and universities are really started recognizing it as an option to earn.
Are they in other areas of education? Are they common at all? Because you said it would be a real challenge using other people's materials and having a university recognize it.
Yes, I think the issue with the universities, the MOOCs are a little more popular with the specific CS courses that they offer as a MOOC, and people take it. And if they want to get credit, they can just sign up for it. But for the micro-credential, the issue primarily is with the assessment, because many of these micro-credentials are self-directed, and then assessments are not necessarily something that universities would endorse. So that's why they're having difficulty with the third-party type micro-credential. So it might be different if the universities engage in creating micro-credential like Loyola is doing in our state.
Right.
It's different because they are developing it within their own system and then get the affirmation and approval of the state. That's a different story. But then when micro-credentials are offered as a third party, it may not really fly at the higher education as much.
And a lot of it is because there's not accountability that the students actually did anything.
Yes.
And the assessment does not necessarily align with the values of the university.
Yes, and also assessments are pretty much self-directed and self-assessed. So that's not necessarily quite approved by the curriculum development or the many different groups that would have to approve that. But it still is not to say that it's not impossible. They're looking at it, at least at Towson. I know that the School of Business looking at micro-credential very heavily, and we're looking at it. So it could be that it becomes a more popular approach, given that a lot of challenges that we have to address if it has to be incorporated in the teacher education program. And obviously, the CS as an integrated approach for the elementary education programs, a lot of states have started that. So the integration is more popular in the state. So I found this on the code.org with regard to micro-credential.
I got excited about that. That's why I asked more questions about the micro-credentials. Like you have this whole snaky path, which I think the fact that it looks like a snake is significant.
Right, that's what they are suggesting, that this is a plan that the people who want to approach micro-credentials should go through. Just the state would have to recognize and adopt that as a pathway. It seems like we're on our way, right?
Yeah.
Diane, to recognize that, and then the universities would have to start the development of the micro-credential, and then obviously the partnership. I think you mentioned that partnership with the maybe third party or other groups would be another good approach, I think. And then basically teachers would have the discounts or some kind of incentives to take those credentials, and then there would be a variety of learning opportunities to help them get these micro-credential and then receive the digital badges for that. Again, I think it is possible that the universities would offer credential without really issuing any formal license. So it could be that people can go through micro-credential without really getting a certificate, formal certificate. But if we have to have it as a formal certificate, that might be a little more challenging thing to do. So I thought that if we go through at least one or two scenarios and see what CSTA resources can help, let's say if we want to create a certificate or endorsement program at the teacher education program, what kind of resources we would have to have and how CSTA can help us. Obviously, the K12 CS standards would be one of the resources that CSTA has. CSS standards for teachers and the framework for knowing what are the areas that we need to have. And we also have the guidance for schools of education that could be helpful. And I think I saw these slides on Diane's as well. The main purpose of it was for any program that we develop, we eventually have to think what impact it has to make. So I think it's good to start by saying what this program wants to do. Is that going to increase equity? Is that improves the technology? Is that improves the competencies? I mean, or it could be multiple impact areas, but that would help with the program evaluation and measurement at the end to see whether we've been able to achieve our goals or not. So that's a good starting point with any programs, whether that's a PD or a new certificate program, a new endorsement program. A vision for that would be helpful. But then step one that we identified here was to look at CS standards for teachers and students. So if you go to the site, you can see that there are standards for teachers tab that you can go to, and that's where you find the teacher standards. The confusion sometimes is because most people are familiar with the student standards, not necessarily the teacher's standards, but the distinction usually is the student standards is what a student will have to delineate at the end of the whatever course or activities that they're doing. So it's what they have to show as the demonstration of their understanding and knowledge and skills. But then what the teacher's standards is doing is to help teachers create the environment that is appropriate for a student to achieve. So the distinction is pretty obvious, but sometimes is confusing because we're more familiar with the students' standards.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So for our master certification elementary teachers, I teach a ed tech class with them. It's a 1-credit digital tools class, and they're required to submit an ISTE portfolio to demonstrate their work with technology. And I'm really liking the idea of incorporating computer science into the ed tech curriculum. And they, in particular, they have a lesson plan that they have to develop as their final project that they submit in their ISTE portfolio that contains ISTE standards. I'm wondering if the CSTA teacher standards, if those align, if there's like a close alignment between the ISTE standards and those, and if those could serve as a replacement or substitute?
My understanding is that the CSTA is in a close partnership with the ISTE. So they're really a very good, and in some resources you can see the alignment as you look at the resources.
Yeah, there should be overlap because we developed them together from the first set of standards, and then the computational thinking standards, and then the computer science standards, and then the teacher computer science standards. We're all had a lot of overlap of the same groups of people, but that's a great idea of, you know, there's a natural fit where it could be part of that portfolio, and maybe we could look at just at that portfolio and how do we just pick a couple points where we can highlight that aspect if people are using that.
Yes, we actually do that in our undergraduate teacher education program. We have an IT integration for teacher education program that we have 2 complete modules on CS. So in addition to, understanding of networking and some basic technology skills, we also have CS. The student learn Scratch in that course. So we incorporate that in our undergraduate teacher education program, but that's a limited exposure, I would say. So I think it needs to be a lot more. But at the graduate level, I know at UNCW, where I was before, we created this, integrated the STEM with a heavy emphasis on the CS. And that was a master's postgraduate kind of program, and we had about 18 credit hours that they took with the CS, with the faculty in CS program, that they taught those modeling and simulation courses with the CS incorporated. So it was and it's on the case studies, the brief of it on the case study in the CSTA. So you can take a look and see what we did. That was a very successful program, but at the master's level. That, those who had a BA or BS, and they were able to take that. So this is the main teacher CS Teacher Standards. As you see, that's the basically the image of that, which is very nicely done, color coded. So you can go to each one of them and get really specific. So if you go and look at the standards, you can see the teacher standards. Obviously, there is a link to the student standard, to the framework, and obviously at the top is also, and then you can also there are tabs that you really click on each one of them, and then you can see each of those areas of the standards with the description, and then the indicators, the specific indicators below them. So that should give you a pretty good sense of what each standard is about and how you could use them. There's also a PDF version of it. There is a condensed PDF version, which is this one, that is basically developed for administrators, maybe policy makers, and those who really need a condensed version, but usually teachers, PD providers, and people who have more interest in the specifics, then they can download the more detailed version of it. So I don't know if you want to take a closer look at that, Christina, but maybe you can do that later, or if you have any specific question with regard to any of those standards.
I just wonder, so much we're at the level of just introducing people to the basic concept, skills, and vocabulary. To what degree does anybody even have the capacity to dig into how to teach it well? Just exposing people to it is kind of the level where we are. What has to happen before we can really get students to wrestle with, the whole other side of it?
I think so. I think that's why we struggled, at least at Towson, for our undergraduate K-8, because our U-Teach is taking care of the high school, so we don't necessarily tap into that part. But for K-8, we struggled with the fact that, we just, at the educational technology integration course, we could just do so much, but that's not enough. That's why, if you look at what we did with the Girls Who Code Club that we're going to present later, we tried to create a test bed for our teacher education students so that they could come and see and actually do things, so that they can see how they can work with kids, how they can incorporate activities. So so that they be exposed at least at this level. But I think, you know, field experience is not enough. It has to be some kind of formal, you know, education going on. So maybe certificate endorsement needs to be in place. I don't know what you think, Diane or Christina.
It's just times the enemy. I mean, there's if you have to start people with the base level of content, then that's as far as you can get. And maybe that's where we stay for a couple of years until everybody's got that basic content. And then we can start talking about, okay, how do you make more people succeed? And how do you, I mean, they're already wrestling with that in all the other subject areas because they already know the content, right? They're talking, really the courses are more focused on how do you do this well so that it reaches and makes the most number of kids successful.
Right. I think they have tried to incorporate that into method courses. I hear that. Again, I'm not sure how much of the CS content can be incorporated. Maybe that's enough at the you know, elementary level, but I'm not sure. I've worked with the, you know, mathematics and science teachers to incorporate computer science in their courses, and in the science area and mathematics, they can go so far with regard to the testing and the content that they have to address. So that's why I believe it's still, we may need to have a you know, an advanced kind of program for teachers to be able to get the complete training. But there are also other challenges, and I think our lack of interest of teacher education students in engaging in any kind of advanced courses. And part of it could be because there is no incentives. They don't have a position at the you know, elementary level that would, or there is no preference for having this type of credential when they go to elementary and middle schools. Maybe they do for the high school, but that's another challenge, that how do you get a student interested in this type of programs? So there are issues that we need to tackle.
Definitely.
Any other thoughts?
I see Lori just joined us here.
Yes, Lori, what?
Hi, everybody.
Yay.
So we've been looking at the CS TA resources for CS education in general, for K12, and different materials at the
yeah, now that it's a gorgeous finished process here, because Lori and her team were actually part of the very, very first ones to give some input on what was reasonable and what wasn't, and what belonged in there and what didn't before they got into the main development process. That was.
Do you want to share some of those, Lori?
It looks so slick now compared to the ridiculous long list we started with.
Yeah, well, it is amazing how much it trimmed down.
Yeah. And the resources are so nice now. But yeah, I don't want to stop your tour, Mahnaz. This is nice to.
That's okay. So
I wasn't part of your team, so you know I was so caught up with the PD providers, I didn't really get to see what was created for the schools of education. So I will be quiet.
Right. If you look at the you know, the School of Ed tab on the resources, you could see that we have several of them that you could obviously click on the plus sign and get the more detail. And that's how do you start with developing a program, what kind of program you would want to develop. And then we have a number of case studies that different universities have different programs, so you can take a look and see what they have developed. And also it's suggestion for the field experiences, what what they have done in this area. So you see examples of that. And we also have activities that have been developed for CS in teacher education programs. So you can tap into all of this. So what the process would we have suggested when you plan to develop a program is to first start with building your team. And then obviously you need to determine the requirements for your state, and then start planning obviously with the CS standards and those that we start. So we make suggestions with regard to building your team. I think you may already know that. Do you know who you usually include? And Lori, who did you include in your team?
For our team, we had the faculty from School of Ed, from math, and from our CS, all working together. We also had a team that met once a month from the local school district, local businesses, and then our faculty here. So we tried to pull as many stakeholders. Oh, and students were involved in that team as well.
So that's wonderful, because that's exactly what you should have, given that, you know, we have started forming a team, and that's what we started developing, you know, inviting CS faculty to join us, teacher education students. We're focusing specifically on K-8. So we're bringing faculty from elementary education in different areas, special education, particularly because that's the area that we definitely need to focus more. And then we were trying to form an advisory board with community people, the people who know students of color specifically, because I think that's another area that if you want to include students of color, particularly African American and Hispanic or Latinos, because these are the two groups that are pretty much absent in CS. So you need to make sure that you include what they really find relevant to them. So I think their presence, as you said, the students' presence, community presence would be really, critical in a team that you form. So the more diverse your team is, the better your program will be, because then you have multiple viewpoint incorporated into it. And then obviously you need to identify the requirement of the state. In our case would be state of Maryland. So you need to know what are requirements for CS and all the stuff that you've learned today and or previously with Diane workshops. So really need to align whatever you're doing, not only nationally with the standards, but also with the state standards and expectations that exists for as I know now. I don't think we are formally certifying students in our at the university, but they have to take praxis, for example, to be able to be certified to teach CS courses at high school. So I think those kinds of things would be critical to know. Any thoughts at this point?
I think the people we have here are in very good shape with
what they're doing.
So share some of the good resources and things. We're only going to have we have less than 15 minutes left. So just looking at the number of slides left, I've been interrupting you, and I apologize. It was such a small group. I wouldn't normally have interrupted you.
So you can see examples of the program right in this tab. And then obviously in this you can see the activities. So if you go to that tab, and then I have a lot of I suggested that we need a hub for the CS curricula. There's so many of them, but then they're all over the place. So I think we may need to do that. We have other resources that CS will get, but I want to get to those concept map because they are so cool that CSTA created. So this is a big concept map of all the resources that CS TA develops. So you can, these are all hyperlinked. So when you go to the site, they're all hyperlinked. So you can just get to them. For example, for the resources for teachers, you can see this concept map, and then they're pretty much the resources that you want, mainly for the teachers to figure out what kind of skills they have right now by using the self-reflection checklist. So they go through the self-reflection checklist and identify their own areas of strength and areas of improvement. And then on the and this map, they can figure out where they should be getting the professional development. So at whatever level they might be, they can just find the appropriate professional development and then go into and plan for that. And then the resources for administrators, again, you could see that there are different resources. These are all resources that you have, but the key point is the coaching toolkit, and that basically provides them with a coaching cycle to support the teacher reflection and the growth before, during, and after teaching a lesson. So there are suggested questions for coaching. So a lot of good resources in this tab. In addition to that, there are really a lot of good details with regard to practice, CS instructional practice. What are the best practices, activities that are appropriate for that, so that the administrators can look and see what teachers are doing, what the students get out of it. So a lot of good resources on that. For the PD, I know Diane knows more about that, but really a lot of good resources, and that the PD provider resources or rubrics would be one of the highlights, that they can take a look at their PD that they're providing and see what are the good examples and what a good PD should look like. So a lot of good checklists and rubrics for that. On the School of Ed, as I said, the highlight would be requirements, what you would have to address when it comes to PD, a lot of case studies that you can take a look, and how to align your program to the standards, cross-discipline standards. So you can just browse through a lot of different resources. And then for policymakers, again, there are issues of at the state level, what for the certificate, what kind of issues they should look at if they are approving a certificate, endorsement, what kind of reform they should be looking at. So lots of policymaking resources. So just to recap, these are, again, different resources that are available at CSTA. So you could really tap into every one of them. And I think that the links are on the slides, and I put that for you.
There's links inside the links inside the links. I mean, the School of Education stuff is so interesting, because like if you go into the activities about what kind of standards aligned activities could you do, a lot of them are very simple activities to have students do a little exploring themselves, but each one of those is a link that takes you to an actual activity, and it shows you which of the standards that would address. So if you were just kind of starting out and wanted to make sure you were doing a little bit of everything, it's like, oh, here's something that addresses standards 1, 3, and 4.
Yeah, so if you go right here, you can see all the resources.
Yeah, I put the link in the chat, so people can go into there under the resources for Schools of Ed. Oops, I just clicked on it again and opened up another window.
So that's where the School of Ed is. So you just basically go into.
Well, we've got about 6 or 7 minutes, so I should let other people ask questions. If Christina or Lori or Lorraine have any questions, but I wanted to ask you about like some of these case studies, if
right,
anybody else has them.
Any thoughts, any of these? I think you can explore this. It's a lot going on in this site, but they're really well designed, and you could just see all kinds of materials that you, and specifically with the resources that we discussed. And you also do not forget about the glossary. You know, there are lots of words, terms that may not be familiar to everyone because we're coming from different fields and different backgrounds to CS. So some of the vocabularies may not be quite familiar to us. So everyone is in the glossary, but it also you know, it's within the material that you, for example, if you go to the standards and tap into it, you can see that all these highlighted, underlined words, they have really the definition of the terms that you may need. So you can see that everywhere in the description of the indicators or the standards, and in every document that you look at, there would be enough of the highlighted terms and glossaries.
So much to learn. I know what I'll be doing for the summer. I agree, Lorraine. I
know, for more than a year.
Taken more of a deep, because I didn't get to be part of this team, and yet, you know, there's so much I want to know from it. I was curious, Mahnaz, in the part that talks about their examples of what does CS look like in a school, it's interesting you picked two of them are online graduate programs. Mm-hmm. So that's how they're teaching, not because of COVID, but they were already online graduate classes?
Yes, at least the one that is at UNCW that I developed, this one. This is an online, the purpose of it was because we had incorporated CS in education and general education courses. That was an NSF funded project. So what we did, we included computing into general education, mathematics, sciences, and different areas of sciences. So about 24 faculty work on that. So they changed their courses at the lower education level courses to CS incorporated. And then to be able to send the students that are coming out of that really integrated approach to CS, we wanted to create a mentor program so that we will have teachers at the school who will be able to mentor our new people. And that's the program. So basically it's a complete online program, but I think I came to Towson when we started implementing it. It was supposed to be half online, half face-to-face for the simulation and the CS part of it. Right. But then you can see the courses, you can see the program objectives, and then the courses that but it's a graduate level. And then we brought teachers, in-service teachers who are in the area of math and science to be able to complete this program. So you could see that, you know, the courses and this.
But it was focused on secondary though, right?
Yeah, well, it definitely is focused on secondary because NSF at that point would not fund the K-8, but now they have changed that. So now they are funding that as well. So this is just one example, but there are other examples like this example, Georgia, I think it's another one that I said that they also have endorsements. So you can kind of see what they have done